Hello, and welcome to another Divorce Discussions episode. And we have the amazing Gayle Weil. She is a licensed psychotherapist. She's graduated with an MS program and received additional certifications and training in child parent psychotherapy, EMDR, and hypnosis. She also has national accreditation as an adoption competent therapist and is a Circle of Security parenting facilitator, which is a program that promotes the attachment bond between parents and their children. So, Gayle, welcome.
Thank you so much, Marty. It's such a pleasure to be speaking with you today.
Well, and you too. And I have got to tell you, I am very partial to people who work with adopted children. I'm adopted. My sister was adopted, and we came through a whole different adoption system where it was, closed. Nobody talked about it. I don't know my bio parents and blah blah blah. But anyhow, what you do is so important. So tell me how you got into this area of working specifically with, helping kids and parents and bonding and adoptions and all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah. So I actually, I just, from a very young age, I just always enjoyed being able to help people in the sense of communicating with them. And it sounds kind of corny, saying that, you just want to help people, but I think there's different capacities in that regard. So there's helping people from the medical perspective, of course. There's helping people by teaching them, and then there's helping people, with different issues they're experiencing. And I kind of take that end of the helping people spectrum. I really enjoy, being able to, hear people, understand what their challenges are, and being able to brainstorm with them on how to overcome those challenges. Now, how did I come into the parenting realm and adoption? How did I come into that specifically? Well, it's actually, we're all parented, and we all experience, what it's like to be in difficult situations with those who love us most and who we love most. And so I've been parented too, I'm a therapist, but I'm also human, of course.
Yes.
So I came into this because I really, long story short, I really feel that the way we respond in the world is really, I think, it has a lot to do with how we are parented and those early connections that we make, those emotional attachments, it really influences how we respond in our day to day. So that's the parenting piece. The adoption piece, I myself was not adopted, but I have family members that were. I have friends that were. And and this was by coincidence. I found myself at my first job, being a caseworker in the foster care system, where I was dealing with a lot of, situations where birth parents were trying to regain custody of their children, or, foster parents were trying to adopt the children, but there was, termination of parental rights that still needed to come into play. So I had that perspective as a caseworker. I also came into it on my second job. I came into it from the clinical standpoint, where I was working in that realm as a therapist. And so I fell into it almost, professionally speaking. But I've really found the work quite rewarding because there's, very different perspectives between the people who were adopted, those who want to adopt, and also the birth parents, I find it all just very rewarding, being able to meet with everybody where they're at.
Yeah, and so you and I have a little bit in common because as a mediator, I did the training and I have done termination of parental rights mediations, which are incredibly grueling. And then I've also done, the open adoption mediations where, or surrogacy mediations where the bio parents and the new parents are trying to set up almost like a co-parenting plan, although it's not quite the same as a co-parenting plan, but in essence, it really is how are both of those groups going to be in the child's life. So it can be an incredibly complex arena. But I know you also work a lot with women and and parents who are facing perhaps some mental health issues or crises or challenges that may impact their parenting. Did I get that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I've also previously taught a class, where people are going through divorce and they have minor children, and it's required that they take this 6-hour class.
Okay.
So I've also facilitated those classes.
Okay. Yeah. So here in Texas and most of the other states, it's a 4-hour mandatory class. So
Okay.
yeah. So I did that for years too. So we're similar in our backgrounds. It's funny how this works out. Tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about what's your take on how parenting changes. I may be putting you on the spot here, Gayle. I hope I'm
Okay.
not. If I am, just answer whatever you want. Like, do you see that sometimes the parenting dynamics shift during a divorce, and sometimes I think they can shift for good, and sometimes I think they can shift for bad. So, do you have any insight, or do you want to talk about that?
I have some opinions about it. Yes.
Yes.
I would say where to start, the good or the not so good.
Wherever you pick.
Yeah. Let's start with the good. I think that let's say you have, some parents that are arguing all the time, and it's becoming a very not the most pleasant home environment because of it. You don't want to be in a home environment where people are arguing all the time, In that sense, I think it could be very good, But then on the flip side, it also can be something that, children can take very personally, as children tend to do. The world, developmentally, the world is really about them, right? They're the cause of everything.
Right.
So sometimes kids, they internalize a divorce as as it being their fault, essentially, And in that sense, it can really affect self-esteem. And it really, it's really up to the parents, both parents, to help the child understand it is not their fault.
Yeah.
And not to badmouth the other parent, and to really be very empathetic and present for the child.
Yeah, and I think, that whole don't badmouth the other parent, that cannot be said enough. And I always encourage the women, because I only work with women in divorce, but I encourage all the women. I say, like, imagine that your child is going to hear and see everything that you say and write about the other parent. How are you going to explain that to your child when they're, they may not understand it when they're 5 or 6, but when they get to be 13, 14, 15, yep, they're understanding a lot of what's going on in the family, and that negative comments and those constant put downs. And, it's not even what you say though, Gayle, it's also like your facial expression. Like if every time they say, my dad, you roll your eyes or you sigh or you look off or you go, pfft, like kids pick up on that stuff really fast.
That hurts because it makes them feel like either they have to pick a side or, that they have to censor what they say about the other parent. And so they don't feel that they could provide full disclosure to the other parent who's rolling their eyes.
Yeah.
Because kids, generally speaking, except in extreme circumstances, they love both their parents. And they shouldn't be made to feel guilty for that love. So that's when divorce can become, you have to be very careful. You have to tread very carefully about the impact it could have on the child's self-esteem in that regard.
Yeah. And here's another topic I think that comes up quite a bit. Well, I have rules at my house, and when the parent goes to the other parent, or when the kids go to the other parent's house, they don't enforce rules. It's all fun and games over there. And I don't like that. Talk a little bit about how those kind of comments to the kids are going to make co-parenting more challenging and really puts the kids in a position of potentially choosing a parent that they want to live with.
It certainly is not pleasant to be hearing your parent complain about how your behavior is at the other house. It kind of makes the kids responsible for their, behavior when there are different rules at the other parent's home. Not pleasant. I think what comes up for parents in that sense, and this is going off a little bit on a tangent. I hope that's okay.
Go off, go off.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I think what ends up happening for parents is the frustration of lack of control. Because you love your kids. You want to be able to have control over their routine and the rules. You want to be able to have it and maintain that control, but you just don't when they're with the other parent. And you need to be able to recognize that, yeah, this sucks.
Yeah.
This is really hard, but whatever my ex's rules are, that's what the rules are, okay? When the kids come back to my home, these are the rules, and that's when I can maintain control. I'm not able to, control what the other parent does. I don't need to vent about that to my kids, because when I vent about that to my kids, all it's doing is putting anxiety on.
And thank you for saying that. And I think the other thing that I'm going to throw in here is the courts don't care if there is a different set of rules at one house or the other house, as long as it's not an endangerment to the child or the child's not in some kind of horrible situation where they may be, there's a potential for risk for the child. The court doesn't care if one parent lets the kids stay up till midnight and the other parent wants them in bed by 8 o'clock. They could care less. You're just going to waste your money going back to the court and dealing with that. So, Gayle, how do you help a parent that maybe is really struggling with the idea of having, again, I'm going to speak from a lot of the women I work with.
Yeah.
Maybe they got 3, 4, 5-year-old kids that have never been away from their home. And now they're going to be going to the other parent's home for maybe a weekend or maybe an extended week, depending on what the custody arrangement is. How do you help deal with the stress around that for parents?
Yeah, I think that it's incredibly helpful to have an outlet first and foremost, just to acknowledge the fears or anxieties that come up with it. Are you worried that the other parent is not going to watch them accordingly? Are you worried that, there are going to be different rules? And yeah, the other parent lets them stay up to midnight and then they come back home to you and their routine is totally thrown off. And then you have a kiddo that's just really difficult to parent because of it. Like, what is it that's coming up for you? And did you have the opportunity to recognize and voice aloud what it is that's coming up so that you can then process it accordingly? Because all the feelings come up. Let's try to differentiate what exactly it is that's coming up.
Yeah. And this is such solid advice. What else do you think parents need to know about this, or maybe what they need to be watching for if their kids are not making the adjustment really well?
I think if the kids aren't making the adjustment well, I think it's important for the parent to be able to empathize with them. And, of course, it's age dependent. But if
Sure.
you're noticing, even in a 5-year-old, let's say the child's behaviors are amping up when they come back home to you. It's good to be able to, in a calm moment, not when, in the midst of a tantrum, okay? That's not the time to be able to take the child aside. I'm talking about when it's a little calmer. That's the time to talk about it. And maybe play detective a little bit, because sometimes you ask a child what's going on, and they're like, I don't know. Because a lot of times they really don't know. That's the time to play detective a little bit. Take them aside and say, hey, I noticed that things were a little tough back there. It might have been difficult to leave, mom's house or dad's house. And then let them have their say, give them a space, a non-judgmental space where they could speak freely about their emotions. And if they don't want to talk, just give them that space that you're here for them and you recognize how challenging it might be.
Yeah, and that is so important. And I think the other thing is that sometimes kids are wise beyond their years, and they know that if they tell you something like, well, I really enjoy my time at dad's house or mom's house, they know that's going to upset you or that's not what you want to hear. So they don't want to say it to you. And I think that's where the power of recognizing that something is not in alignment for the kids and reaching out to a therapist or as a family therapist or as a parent going to a therapist yourself and finding out maybe how to deal with the stress that you're experiencing that somehow is being transmitted over to your children.
Yeah, 100%. Because it's not only this, of course, you love your child so much, of course, that's a stressor. But it's also other stressors on top of that stressor. It's the stress of maybe working, co-parenting with a spouse, an ex-spouse who maybe is particularly challenging to communicate with. So you have that stressor. Maybe you want further skill building on how to communicate with a difficult ex. And then on top of that, how to manage maybe some of the things you're noticing in your child that concern you.
Yeah.
There's a whole host of things that could be coming up.
Yeah. And I'm going to say something that my clients have heard me say this a million times. If you had difficulty communicating with your spouse in your relationship, it's not going to get easier when you're co-parenting. It's just not.
Yeah.
I mean, unless you both really work at it. And I've had so many people say, oh, thank goodness I'm divorced. I don't have to communicate with them. I said, if you've got kids, you're now going to be communicating probably more than you were in the past because everything needs to be communicated now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Boundaries around it too, which is
Yeah.
important.
Absolutely.
Navigate those boundaries. A therapist can help with it.
They really can. And there is, and I know we're almost out of time, but I'm so glad to see there's more effort to remove that stigma or that negativity about working with a therapist because the benefit, we'll talk a little bit about the benefits of working with a therapist if you're in a stressful situation.
Yeah. Um, it's so good that you mentioned the stigma. I think it's gotten better, but there is still some maybe a little shame of approaching someone for therapy. Therapy is a very vulnerable thing. You're talking to a complete stranger about things that are deeply personal. You wouldn't even tell your closest, loved one. Um, but it is, and it could be very incredible if you're meeting with the therapist that you have the best fit with, of course.
Yeah, yeah. And that's we probably need to have another podcast episode maybe about how to find a right therapist. That would be an interesting topic because I think it's very personal and it's very important like you said to have that alignment with your therapist because if not they're not going to be you're not going to get as much out of the therapy as you possibly could. So Gayle, you have shared a ton of information, and I'm sorry that these are short, these little divorce discussions, but they're short, but they're full of information. What do you think is the most important thing we talked about here today?
Yeah, we talked about a lot of good things here. Wow. I would say that it's important to, recognize that our kids need to be protected emotionally. That's a big takeaway I'd like people to have. Whatever it is that you're being triggered with your anxiety regarding divorce, as a big thing that we talked about, please know that your kids they're experiencing some emotional turmoil too, and to be very mindful about not just what you say, but also the body language. That's so important because they will pick up on it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Gayle, if people want to find out more about what you do or get in touch with you to possibly work with you, what is the best way to get hold of you?
The best way is to go on my website. That's GayleWeillLCSW.com. So it's the spelling of my first name, spelling of my last name, GayleWeillLCSW as in licensed clinical social worker.com.
Thank you so much, Gayle. Really appreciate this. And everybody, I want to thank you for listening in to Divorce Discussions. And don't forget to listen in to our next interview.